we meet in an hour of change and challenge, in a decade of hope and fear, in an age of both knowledge and ignorance. If this capsule history of our progress teaches us anything, it is that man in his quest for knowledge and progress is determined and cannot be deterred. Because that goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills. Because that challenge is one that we're willing to accept, one we are unwilling to postpone, and one we intend to win.
Welcome to the Energy Impact Podcast. I'm your host, John Chaplin, and today I'm here with Collin McLelland from Digital Wildcatters, the CEO and co-founder. Thanks for joining the podcast, Collin.
Yeah, man, absolutely. Happy to be here and getting to nerd out on energy. It's something that I enjoy doing.
Awesome, great. Well, yeah, give me a little bit of background. What really got you interested in the energy space?
Yeah, so I grew up in Midland, Texas, right in the middle of the Permian Basin, the most prolific oil and gas basin in the United States, and arguably one of the most prolific in the world. And so graduated high school in 2008, and it was in the middle of the Great Recession. And so it wasn't a great time for any industry, to be honest, but oil and gas was also in a downturn. And anyways, I didn't go to school. I was always an entrepreneur, didn't know really what I wanted to do. And I was at a Gold's Gym. And I remember specifically, I was lifting weights. I was on a bench press and I ran into one of my high school buddies. And he's like, yeah, I just got a job roughnecking on drilling rigs and I'm making $90K a year. And, I'm like 19 years old. I was like, you're making $90K a year. And so started pursuing that and ended up getting a job at the same company that my friend was working at, and learned how to drill oil and gas wells. And that was the start of my addiction to energy, was just drilling wells out in West Texas.
Awesome. So you kind of came in not right at the beginning of the shale revolution, but kind of pretty close to the beginning, and have been riding it ever since, it sounds like.
Yeah, it was very close to the beginning. So to give you context, the wells that I was drilling were still conventional vertical wells, 11,000 foot wells. Our rig was extremely fast at drilling them, and we were drilling them in about 12 to 14 days. Most rigs were still taking anywhere up to 3 to 4 weeks to drill an 11,000 foot well, which if you look at how long it takes to drill a horizontal well now, just to give you context, I mean, you can go 10,000 foot vertically and then 10,000 feet horizontally, and we can do that in about 12 days now. And so back then, Pioneer Natural Resources didn't even have a horizontal drilling program, and so really got to see the shale revolution, boots on the ground. After I drilled for a couple of years, I wanted to learn about fracking. So I moved into wireline to learn completions and, just running and gunning, working 110 hours a week, fracking wells. And so, yeah, I mean, you talk about the shale boom, got to see it firsthand.
And on the ground too. Not many people really work out in the field and then transition later on. A lot of people start off in the engineering and geologist offices in Houston or Oklahoma City or what have you.
Yeah, it was interesting because going out of my friend group, outside of the friend that got me into the industry, all my friends went off to college, and a lot of them go off to be, petroleum engineers and geologists and landmen and things of that nature. And so, they're off at university for 4 years or so. And by the time they came out, I'd already been in the oil field for 4 or 5 years. And so I felt like this seasoned vet by the time that they actually got out of university. And, some of them took that path, you go, work at a major oil company, and you're based out of Houston, and then, maybe you work your way out to the field office eventually. And so that's what's interesting about the energy industry, is that, I mean, there's a million different paths that you can take, and they're all pretty interesting.
Yeah. So you started off kind of working in the field. What really led you, I guess, to where you're at now, kind of running Digital Wildcatters?
Yeah. So a lot happened in between there. So one of my first drillers on my rig that I worked for, he had taken a job in Houston for this company that was a joint venture between Shell and Halliburton originally. And they had a really cool technology that was running expandable casing in oil and gas wells. And they needed a project manager. And he thought highly of me. So he referred me. And that was in 2014. I got brought to Houston by that company. The company's name is Venture Global Technology. And it was really great because I got to manage, millions and millions of dollars of drilling and completions projects. And I was on rigs, deep water rigs in the Gulf of Mexico. I spent time on the North Slope of Alaska, negative 60-degree Fahrenheit blizzards. I worked on wells in the middle of golf courses in Los Angeles. And so I got to spend time in every oil and gas basin in the United States, and the majority of them. And really just got great experience there. Really seeing oil and gas upstream operations across the entire spectrum. And so 2018 rolls around, I've been at Adventure for 4 years and been in Houston, and I started building up my network in Houston, and I saw something interesting happening. I was all, like I said, I wasn't interested in going to university. I was always an entrepreneur. I was super interested in technology. And I started seeing this kind of perfect storm brewing up. And you had what was called the Great Crew Change. And so you had boomers and you had millennials, and there was no Gen X. And the reason that there was no Gen X is because of the downturn in the 80s. Gen X just did not go to school for petroleum engineering or other disciplines like that. And so what ended up happening was oil and gas was a solid, call it 15 years behind on software compared to Silicon Valley. And you'd go to these trade shows, and the software that was presented, was developed in the 90s and early 2000s, and it looked terrible. And this presented this opportunity where you had these millennial entrepreneurs that were working, and they're engineers working in oil and gas companies. And they would say, hey, I think I can create a better software solution and offer it as a cloud-based solution and go sell it to all these other oil and gas companies. And so you started having this little ecosystem of digital tech startups and oil and gas start popping up. And the problem is that there was no formal community or ecosystem for them. So you talk to them, and the biggest problems were there was a lack of early stage capital. We're building enterprise solutions, and we don't have any funding. We don't have champions that are forward thinking to adopt our technology within these large oil and gas companies. And you go down the list, and there's a few others. And so I started talking to investors on the coast. I'm like, hey, you should look at oil and gas technology. There's some really cool things happening. And they would always ask me, where can we go to learn about oil and gas tech? And there wasn't a single place on the internet to send them to. And so we started this podcast in 2018 called Oil and Gas Startups Podcast. We weren't very imaginative in the name, but it was straight to the point of what the show was about. And we brought on startup founders and gave them a platform to not only talk about the technological solutions that they were building, but also tell about their personal story. How did you get to this point? How did you discover this problem? And really humanized the business and the industry as a whole. And what happened on the flip side of that was the listeners to the podcast were oil and gas companies, exploration companies, oil field services. You had private equity funds, VCs that were coming to our show to discover these new technological solutions. And ended up, you'd see transactions happen. A startup would come on our show and land $1 million pilot with an oil and gas company whose engineer was listening to the show. And so we started doing that and really building this community based off of content. And, part of the story is also had this realization that content was the highest form of leverage of our generation. You can now start a podcast, or you could start creating content on social media, and all of a sudden, you're getting this reach that back in the day, you had to have a show on cable TV, or you had to have all of this funding, and now it just wasn't like that anymore. And so started leveraging that. And what we did was we parlayed that into these events called Energy Tech Nights. And the thesis was, hey, let's get some energy tech companies to come present. We'll get the right people in the room. We'll get a couple of kegs of beer. We'll get some pizza, and we'll make it like Silicon Valley-esque and just make it a great environment where people can connect. And it was a hit. The first one that we did, company presents, there's an investor in the crowd, ends up placing a $5 million check into their Series A. And so for a couple of years, we just kept giving and giving and giving value and building this community of young, forward thinking energy professionals. And so 2020, we decided, there's a lot of things that I tried doing. I quit my job in 2018 and didn't have a plan. I have a wife, 3 kids, I'm making a little under $200,000 a year. Like, I can't complain. And I just quit. And my boss is like, why are you quitting? I'm like, I don't know. I'm just going to go start a company. He's like, what are you going to start? I was like, I have no idea, but I'm going to go figure it out. And so I was throwing some stuff at the wall. I bought some oil wells up in Oklahoma and found out, I didn't want to operate marginal stripper wells that were doing 2 barrels a day. It was a huge headache. And so there's a lot of, in between stuff there. But in 2020, decided to go on Digital Wildcatters full time. And we went full time like 3 weeks before COVID hit. And so, I talked to some investors, I talked to some advertisers, and I was like, yeah, I think we have a commercial business here. And then all of a sudden COVID hit and there were no investors, there were no advertisers. And so we really had to, knuckle down in 2020 and really think about, hey, what's our thesis here as a business, and what are we doing in the future? And we've come a long way in that thought process, both on what our thesis is of what we're building and on a commercialization front. So happy to kind of talk about what we are today and what our vision is, but I'll talk your ear off if you let me. So I'll give you a break. If you have any questions.
It's super interesting what you guys have been developed. I'm curious, going back to, kind of, it seems like the core thesis was around like this large gap, because I started off in the oil and gas industry. I remember the first software I ever learned was Aries, made by Halliburton, and wondering how could this still exist, in 2013.
Aries is the poster boy for that. And, my friends, Armand and Jeremy over at Combo Curve, that was their whole thesis, is we're going to displace Aries. And I knew those guys when they were, it's just the 2 of them working out of a house. And now they're, a very large company with 300 plus employees. And so that was the poster boy for it, was Aries for sure.
So have you seen a lot of that uptick in adoption of, let's say, software in particular, but technologies, from these even legacy oil and gas firms?
Oh, absolutely. So if you look at, let's call it the adoption curve of new digital tech, because I think it's important to bifurcate this conversation a little bit. Oil and gas is extremely advanced when it comes to downhole technology and physics, right? I mean, there's probably not a more advanced industry in the world, but talking specifically about software and digital tech, it was always behind. And what happened in 2018 and 2019 was, okay, the ball started getting rolling a bit, but you still had that old adage of oil and gas where it's like, hey, we'll just drill another oil well. Like, if we want to gain efficiency, that's cool. If we want to make money, we'll just drill another oil well. 2020 and COVID changed that, flipped the script, and really made oil and gas companies and people say, okay, how do we become more efficient? And how do we extract more value from our assets and our resources and scale that effort while not scaling G&A and personnel in a linear fashion? And, I think that that really transformed the culture and the thought process. I heard someone say the other day that we would have been better off if we had like another year of post-COVID suppressed prices. It would have done us some good, but overall the culture is changing pretty drastically towards that. And I can tell you that by hard evidence that we have from the things that we do at Digital Wildcatters. We do a energy tech night, and the company will present, and E&Ps or oil and gas companies are there in the audience, and we'll transact with them. And so I could tell you from my personal experience from 2017, 18 timeframe to where we're at now, night and day difference to the adoption of technology. And even you look at like some of the topics like methane mitigation and flaring and methane management and things like that. You would have brought that stuff up in 2018, people would have told you to, kick rocks. And now it's at the forefront of, hey, what new technology is out there for pneumatic devices? How can we replace, valves that are leaking? How can we monitor with, fixed wing craft, rotary, drones, satellite imaging. And then like, I'll tell you, there's a large independent operator out in West Texas that's private. So the reason I say that they're private is because they have no scrutiny from public markets, from activist investors. And they have one of the most advanced workflows that I've seen with being able to detect methane leaks from fixed wing craft. And within 24 hours, they have an entire workflow that sends it to a engineer and then to a technician to get out there and fix it. And so it's pretty cool seeing that stuff when it existed, 5 years ago. And so 100% the mindset around technology has definitely changed.
Awesome. Yeah, that's pretty interesting. And it's definitely good to see. Like I said, when I started in the industry, I was surprised at the lack of software penetration, but I've seen pretty good inroads there. I guess tell me a little bit more, because I think you've expanded out, right, to several other, I guess, podcast brands or different types of formats. So beyond just tech and software, where do you kind of see Digital Wildcatters growing, and what are some of the interesting brands you're looking out there to develop now?
Yeah, so let me start 40,000 foot view and talk about what we actually are as a company and what our vision is, because we always use content as a means to an end to build community, and it's been great for that. But what we're really excited about building is this vertically integrated professional network for energy professionals. And so what you saw, you hear it between you and I talking. It's like you have digitally native millennials that are used to software and it doesn't exist in this industry. And then you start looking at other industries, and you look at Stack Overflow. Stack Overflow had a community platform for software developers where you could go ask a question about your code and you could get an answer from the community. Then that answer is indexed in a knowledge graph to where it can be queried the next time someone has a similar question. They can go query it, find what they need. That type of platform didn't exist for the most technical workforce in the world, which is energy professionals. And so what started happening was you had these groups of energy professionals start congregating around the internet. You have a group over on LinkedIn, you have a group over on Reddit, you have a group over on Twitter, and none of these platforms were purposely built for the energy industry. So they don't really serve the energy industry. And that caused a couple of problems. So my favorite problem to point out was over on Twitter. You'd have a production engineer in oil and gas come ask, hey, why do I have this iron carbonate build up in my saltwater disposal well? And two other production engineers would come in and give answers. And it was really technical and valuable information. And then 2 days later, that was lost into the ether. You couldn't find it unless you did a really advanced search on Twitter. And so I said, hey, shouldn't we be indexing that information and focusing on this knowledge transfer and knowledge retention, because it's a huge problem in the energy industry? And so really focused on building this app, which is called Collide. And Collide is a professional network for energy professionals where you can come on there and have discussions with people that, hey, I'm a reservoir engineer out in West Texas, or, hey, I'm working on this battery storage technology, and, I need a oil and gas engineer that's familiar with this permitting process, and just allow people to have these collisions and be able to streamline information and break down silos. And what's exciting for us about that is, we're a very community-centric company. Community is at the center of everything that we do. And so we think in the future, we're going to have the ability to build this platform where if you're looking for any piece of information, you're looking for a subject matter expert, you're looking for your next gig and want to accelerate your career, that happens on the Collide platform. And so that's what we're really excited about. And obviously content, your question about podcasts plays a piece in that. We have I don't even know how many podcasts we have now. I think we have 6 or 7 of them. And, they kind of go across the spectrum. You have oil and gas podcasts, which we talked about. You have Chuck Yates podcast. Chuck Yates ran Kane Anderson's energy fund, $6.5 billion energy fund. He backed a lot of oil and gas operators. You have Energy Tech Startups, which is hosted by Jason. He's the co-founder of Greentown Labs, has some really cool energy tech and climate tech companies on there. And so we'll always use content as a way to educate people and bring people into the Digital Wildcatters community. What's really interesting about what we've built on Collide is we have this product that's called DW Insight, and DW Insight, we've already uploaded 700 videos on there. So we've taken all the videos from our podcast. We've already taken all the videos from our presentations at Energy Tech Night, all of our panels from our 2 big events, which are called Empower and Fuse. And then we've started bringing in third-party podcasts, like my friend Yoshi. She's a reservoir engineer, has a podcast about petroleum engineering. We've brought in the Distributed Energy Resources podcast. So we already have 700 videos on there, and it's built on this machine learning engine to where you can go in there and you can search, hey, I'm interested in CCUS. Boom. It'll bring up every video where we've talked about CCUS, has a transcript of the video. Here soon in the future, you'll be able to say, hey, I want the 5 bullet points. Give me a summary on this. And so building this search engine, if you're a production engineer for an oil and gas company that's trying to figure out what you're doing on methane management, you don't have 6 hours to go listen to 6 podcasts, right? You want answers and to be able to streamline that information. And so you can come to DW Insight and use this content search engine to search methane emissions and get information in a more digestible format. So those are all the things that we're working on.
Wow. Yeah. Those are all super, super interesting. I mean, it's definitely developing that community, but then also giving them the resources to kind of serve that community is how you get them to stick around. Right. And
I love that you said that, because that's actually our mission. Our mission is to enable our community and enable them with the platform and resources to go solve the world's energy crisis. I think that the energy crisis is one of the more pressing challenges that society faces. And it's everyone in the Digital Wildcatters community that's working towards solving that problem. And so really being, giving them the resources to be able to do that is what we're about.
Awesome. So yeah, I mean, going back to that energy crisis, where do you guys see? I know you're based in Houston, really started off with an oil and gas focus, but how do you guys have seen that evolve over the years? With all these new technologies, whether it's battery storage or carbon capture, evolving down in Houston.
Yeah, I think it's funny. I have this graph that I've built, this image. I'll send it to you sometime, and it's what I call our knowledge graph. And at the center of it, you have oil and gas. And, oil and gas still powers 80% of the world. It's at the center of everything. But you start looking at these adjacent energy verticals, whether it's renewable, CCUS, geothermal, lithium, Bitcoin mining, battery storage, power generation and grid. All of these things are connected to each other. They're all connected to each other. And all of these adjacent energy verticals are dependent on oil and gas for technical expertise, for resources, capital, things of this nature. I can't tell you how many times I get, last month alone, I had 2 climate tech startups from Silicon Valley reach out to me. One's a CCUS technology, one's a permitting automation software for renewables. Reach out to me like, hey, we need a oil and gas engineer, probably 15-year experience from an EPCs, familiar with the permitting process. And so I see all of these things already, and it gets me excited because, I'm very, I'm very forward thinking when it comes to technology as a whole. And so I love new technologies. I'm very pro energy. I think that there's 2 terms that I hate. One is energy independence. I don't think that energy independence is a real thing. I don't think that it ever can be. We're a global market, and we're dependent on other participants in that market. And it doesn't matter if it's oil and gas or it's renewables. And so having a diverse energy mix in a secure energy mix is extremely important. And so, and then the second thing is energy transition. There's not much of a transition happening here. Renewables have been additive to thermal generation. And so looking at it and saying, okay, hey, look, fossil fuels are going to be part of the energy mix for the foreseeable future. So how can we enable technology to make these operations cleaner and more efficient, which we are seeing this happening in real time right now, like we were just discussing. And then what new technologies are there out there for energy production? And, the thing about energy is very geographically dependent. You don't have any hydropower out in West Texas. There's no water, but you have a lot of wind, you have a lot of solar, you have a lot of natural gas, you have a lot of oil, right? You go up to parts of the Northeast or Canada, they have a ton of hydro, but they probably don't have a ton of solar. The sun doesn't shine up there. And so thinking about, okay, I'm an energy maximalist. I'm like more energy, and I think more energy usage is a good thing for society. And so, okay, how can you build all of these different energy systems and really utilize different geographic regions? And then really, I think the problem that we have to figure out as an industry and a society is transmission, distribution, load balancing. But, one of the things that gets me most excited is like virtual power plants. Like, I think it's awesome that at my house, like I can have solar panels and I can have a Tesla power wall and I can have an F-150 for additional battery capacity that's charged by my house. But I can also have my 12-valve Cummins diesel just in case, stuff hits the fan and I need a diesel engine. And then I can get a backup nat gas generator. And all of a sudden, if I have bi-directional metering and I have software that can run all of this, all of a sudden I'm a power plant. And I can send power back to the grid. And you're starting to see this happening in Texas and California with deals with like Tesla and PG&E, where all of a sudden all these homes that have solar panels and battery are all working together in unison to, put 15 megawatts back into the grid. And so, you asked about Houston specifically. Houston's the energy capital of the world, always will be. You have some other hot spots for like energy tech and climate tech. I'll call out Boston here. Okay, yeah, try building hydrogen infrastructure out in Boston. It's not going to happen. Hey, where's the hydrogen infrastructure at? Where can you actually build stuff? It's here in Houston, Texas. I talked to this startup the other day. They're 3D printing rocket fuel. And I didn't even know what that meant. And I was like, but it sounds cool. And they're headquartered up in Dallas. But you know where they're doing their rocket testing at? It's actually out in West Texas in Midland, my hometown, right in the middle of the oil field. And it's because why? You got vast space and very, very industrial place that's just used to those things. And so Texas, it as a hub is extremely critical for energy. And it doesn't matter what source of energy you're talking about. It's going to be huge in aerospace. It's going to be huge in manufacturing. And it's where the large corporates are too for resources and funding and engineering resources. And so you just can't be involved with energy and not pass through Houston or Texas as a whole. It's not possible.
Yeah, completely agree. As a Houston native, couldn't agree with you more. So, but yeah,
so, I was gonna say, so people are probably like, oh, they're biased. They're from Houston. I've lived in Houston for 9 years. I'm not from here originally. I love this city. I think that there's more opportunity in this city than anywhere else in the world. Actually, maybe outside of Midland. Midland's got a ton of opportunity for entrepreneurs and builders, but Houston is amazing. It's an amazing place that I think is just going to continue to grow in value with the rise of different energy systems. So it's a pretty exciting time.
Yeah, it definitely is. So yeah, I also wanted to touch on Fuse, which is I think an event I'm actually going to be attending later in October.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
maybe give me a little bit more info about that, or like history. What kind of came about with this Fuse event and what's really driving it.
Yeah, so Fuse, I talked about our energy tech nights a little bit earlier, and with energy tech nights, great event. Those have really grown to where they're like 200, 300 people, and it's very casual atmosphere. And what we thought of was, hey, how can we expand this to have a South by Southwest of energy? Like, how can we create this festival style feel that has a focus on energy tech? And so that's what Fuse is. And We did the first one last year, had about 1,000 people attend, had great speakers, keynotes from the CEO of EQT, Toby Rice. EQT is the largest net gas producer in the United States, actually in the world. You had Mike Skelly come and speak. Mike Skelly's the OG in renewable assets and building those out. You had Jane Strichter. She runs the Houston Energy Transition Initiative. She's amazing. Worked most of her career at BP and had a ton of startups across the spectrum. You had the cutting edge technology in electric frac trucks. So we had 2 electric frac trucks out there. You had Accenture was there with their metaverse platform. And so really the idea there was let's focus on the future of energy tech. And this year I think that we'll probably be a little bit more adjacent to oil and gas and subsurface tech like hydrogen, geothermal, things of that nature, because you don't want to spread out too far and too wide. It was a little hard to get in depth in the content on all of those topics. And so, it's going to be a great time. John Arnold, I don't know if you know John Arnold, multi-billionaire hedge fund trader, and was critical in building the first natural gas trading marketplaces that are still used today. And now he's very active in funding renewable assets and transmission. And him and Mike Skelly are business partners now on their new venture. And Bobby Tudor will be speaking. Bobby was the founder and partner of Tudor Pickering Holt, and just very well versed in capital markets when it comes to energy and energy tech. And so the idea there, the idea for any of our events is we focus on collisions. And so I'm going to go on a rant here, and you can stop me, but
go ahead. Yeah.
we talked about software being antiquated in this industry. Another thing that was super antiquated were the events and the conferences and the trade shows. And every conference that you go to, it was in some hotel lobby, and it was stuffy, and you had to wear suits, and they're serving baked chicken, and it was very boring and looked nothing like Silicon Valley, right? And you go to a big conference or a trade show, and it'd be in the convention center, and just very awkward to walk up to people, wasn't very inviting. And so with our events, we said, how can we flip that script? How can we host a party and inject valuable content in that so that we can remove the friction and actually allow people to connect with each other? And what we coined was we wanted to create these collisions, and those collisions are the catalyst for ideas and collaboration and opportunity. And we've seen it time after time after time at our events that people just run into each other, and things come from that. Businesses come from that. Deals come from that. Funding comes from that. And that's why we named the app Collide, is because we want those same collisions to happen in a digital atmosphere now too. And so when you come to our events, our motto used to be lose the suit and tie, like come dressed comfortably. We don't want this to be stale and boring. We just want to get smart people together and enable a atmosphere where everyone can further both, their career and the industry. And we've been pretty successful in making that happen. You want a funny story about this? I told you I can talk, so I'm gonna make your job easy for you as a podcast host. A funny story is Toby Rice, who I was telling you about, the CEO of EQT. He had to do a interview live on CNBC the day that he was there. And so we set up a camera and a microphone and everything. And the event was outdoors. We did it at a brewery, and we had this big stage set up, and it said Fuse across it. And so Toby's sitting outside with his stage behind him, and he's doing this live interview on CNBC. And at the end of the interview, the CNBC anchor is like, and that's Toby Rice from EQT, which appears to be a music festival. And so I was like, yes, I know that we're hitting the vibe there if he thinks that that's a music festival. So yeah, it's it's just a good time, and we want people to get a lot of value out of it.
No, I mean, I think y'all's mission statement is well aligned. Being able to lower the barriers to really have people connect from all over the industry and just be able to share that knowledge, share their experiences, and really just bring further people into the energy industry. I remember when I got into it, just being amazed at everything that went into it. That was, some people just turn their lights on and think that it's as simple as that, but there's a whole team of people, across the globe that's working to make that happen. So it's pretty interesting.
Most of society thinks that electricity just comes from their wall. They don't understand what it actually takes to create that energy, right? And, one thing that I've seen is it's easy to bash those types of people, but you think about it. If you're a kid that grows up in New York City, why would you ever be thinking about energy production? You've never been exposed to it. You never had a medium to really consume interesting content. And that's what's been interesting about Digital Wildcatters is that we've been able to create content that gets broadcast out to the masses and teaches people about energy. So, there's an element of raising energy IQ from the content that we do. And then the second thing is, I really saw that we had an obligation to be a bridge between traditional energy and new energies. And it's easy online. I think social media is runs society a little bit in terms of everything's always a conflict and people always hate each other. And, oh, I like wind and solar. I hate oil and gas, or I'm oil and gas. I hate wind and solar. And on Twitter, and Reddit, people are fighting. I get those people together in the same room all the time. And you find out that one, people are much more cordial in person. And two, there's actually not that big of a gap between how people think and operate in energy. And, that's what we did with Fuse last year. It's like, hey, can we bring people together from all these different energy backgrounds and have a successful event? And we did that. And, that's what happens when you allow an environment for people to connect and just share information and knowledge with each other.
Right. That's exactly right. Yeah. I think it's always surprising to people who think that renewables and oil and gas are at odds to learn that most renewable assets are in West Texas, where, there's plenty of, wind and solar to be able to be mined. It's the same people that used to work in oil and gas that are usually working on those asset developments as well.
Texas is the leader in wind power generation. A lot of people don't know that in the United States. And I think soon they'll probably be the leader in solar power generation as well. Yeah. You go out to my home out in Midland, Texas, guess what? It's drilling rigs, frac jobs, pump jacks, but then you have a ton of wind farms. You have a ton of solar arrays.
Right.
And so that's, and yeah, like to your point, it's a lot of the same technicians, a lot of the same landmen, a lot of the same financing groups. So there's a lot of overlap between them. And yeah, that's, I think that, again, that's just more ignorance than anything, and that's just something that needs to be educated on. And I love looking at West Texas. Like, West Texas is pro energy. If West Texas had water, they'd have hydropower too. And so really looking at that of like, okay, how do you increase energy production across all energy systems and maximize what you have available? I think that's super important moving forward.
Yeah, definitely. Well, yeah, I'd love to kind of ask quick questions. You're at the kind of collision point for all these technologies, outside of oil and gas and let's say solar and wind, since those are pretty developed. What is the new technology that you think is really gaining a lot of interest or has a lot of momentum behind it?
Yeah. So, from an energy production standpoint, there's a lot of talk around geothermal and hydrogen. My good friend Tim Latimer, CEO of Fertile Energy, is doing some big things with geothermal. But I think the key point of what you asked is like, what's new? And you look at geothermal. Geothermal is not new. We've been doing geothermal since the 70s. And really it's the advent of new drilling technology in oil and gas that has enabled geothermal to now look appealing. But even at that, I mean, you're still looking at small scale. What I'm actually interested in is small modular reactors and nuclear. I think that nuclear energy, we discovered it too early, and then we figured out how can we use nuclear technology to kill people instead of power the world, and then have some incidents, and it's just put too many layers of bureaucracy and scar tissue on it. But like if we discovered nuclear technology today, we're like, oh, this is the answer to a lot of our problems. And so I'm pretty interested in SMRs. Nuclear fusion is another thing that's interesting to me. I think that there's probably more hype than substance around it at this point, but I do think that humans will eventually figure that out. And so, if you look at nuclear, it's pretty funny. Like, there's two responses about nuclear from the oil and gas industry. The first response is, yeah, of course, nuclear is the future. Like, we understand energy density. The second response is, hey, don't tell anyone nuclear is the future. It can displace oil and gas. But at the end of the day, everyone understands that, nuclear is a solid answer. And, there's a lot of pushback out there, especially from the renewable crowd, that nuclear is not economic. But my point is, you look at, offshore wind right now seems to be a zero interest rate phenomenon, and there's projects are getting crushed. And so, hey, if we're gonna subsidize energy, why not subsidize nuclear over non-dispatchable renewables? So it's unfortunate that nuclear has so much baggage with it, but definitely interested in geothermal and SMRs and maybe some hydrogen in the future.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean, like we talked about earlier, it's not really one winner take all. It's going to be a diverse energy mix that's appropriate for whatever area we're talking about and whatever resources are available. So
yeah, what I do think is interesting. I don't like to talk about like individual technologies. I like to talk more about conceptual systems. I would label it as. And so, like, I think that North America manufacturing is onshoring. You're going to see it in places like Texas and Mexico. And what's going to happen is that these manufacturing plants are going to start co-locating with energy assets. So whether that's solar, wind, geothermal, they want access to cheap and reliable energy. And so they're going to go straight to the source. I think that's super interesting when you think about hydrogen, especially in things like steel production, which have so much CO2 emissions that, hey, if we can replace fossil fuels, that process, now you have, geothermal or wind, it's powering electrolyzers that are producing hydrogen. And now the hydrogen is the input and the feedstock to produce steel. Like we talked about with virtual power plants earlier, like those are the things that I'm pretty excited about. I love Bitcoin mining as dispatchable load for load balancing. It's hard to be like, hey, what's one thing that you're excited about? Because there's a lot of cool stuff happening. And it's not necessarily just like, hey, what's one cool energy production that I'm excited about? I'm more excited about how all of these systems tie together in the future
and play together. Yeah, that makes sense. And it's going to be a pretty interesting world over the next couple of decades to see how these solutions get married together. Because you're right, I think the co-location is where most energy sources are headed, especially with the renewables today, but even battery storage and other solutions in the future. So
yeah, I think if you look at society on a timeline, we haven't been producing energy like this at a commercial scale for a very long time. Start whaling and getting whale oil, and then we discover oil and gas. Over the last, call it really 100 years, really started commercializing the oil and gas industry. And then over the last couple of decades, started building out renewables. And it's interesting that you brought up like, hey, what's one energy tech you're interested in? Because I don't even believe that the future of energy, I don't think that we've discovered it at this point. You think about it, it's like, okay, hey, look, if there are advanced civilizations out there in the universe and they are traveling the cosmos, do we think that they're powered by, wind and solar or even nuclear? Probably not. And so, it'd be pretty ignorant to sit here and say like, oh, hey, definitively what we have now is what we have in the future. No one would have ever thought that we're doing with what we're doing with oil and gas back in the early 1800s, and so, but I think if you plot that out on a timeline, like you said, the next couple of decades are super exciting and interesting because so much is changing and it's changing quickly, and that change opens up opportunity. And you look at how cycles are kind of shifting, like tech software is kind of they are moving into a recession, and now all of a sudden energy is cycling up and, bringing new technology to the energy industry. And so just very exciting time to be in this industry and be involved in it.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. Well, Collin, thanks for joining and telling us more about Digital Wildcatters and all the events and media that's going around it. And looking forward to participating in Fuse, in October. I guess any thing that you want to, any way that people can get in contact with you, or what's the best way to kind of engage with you from the audience?
You can find me personally anywhere on the internet. So my name's Frackslap on every social media. So you can find me on Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, LinkedIn. Pretty easy to find there. If you want to engage with Digital Wildcatters, you can go to digitalwildcatters.com. If you're an energy professional and you're interested in joining Collide, you can find Collide at collide.io. It is free to join, and we have a beta group of users in there. So we need help squashing bugs, feedback on features. So would love to have anyone's help on that.
Great. Awesome. Well, yeah, I encourage any of our listeners to absolutely do that. Well, thank you, Collin. You have a good one.
Yeah, John, appreciate you, man. Thank you.
Our leadership in science and industry, our hopes for peace and security, our obligations to ourselves as well as others, all require us to make this effort, to solve these mysteries, to solve them for the good of all men and for the progress of all people.